Thank you for joining us for Robberies, Holdups, and Shootouts, True Crimes of Lake County, with museum educator Nicole Stalker, who joins us tonight from Lake County Forest Preserves. So yes, you'll be educated tonight, I'm sure, and maybe hopefully everyone sleeps well tonight. We'll see. Think you know it all, prove it. Join us for trivia night on November 7th at 7 p.m. here in the meeting rooms. We will be using Kahoot for this lively in-person game. It's a lot of fun. You don't have to form a team or anything like that. You can come just on your own. Snacks will be provided. So it's a lot of fun. We give prizes to the top 3. So we try not to make it too hard. We have some hard questions, some easier ones. So everyone can get
comes adults.
Adults. It's adults. So 18 plus. Yeah. This program is being recorded, but it's only going to be shared with those who are registered. So if you are here in the room, if you could silence your phones really quick for me, that'd be great. And if you are joining us from home, if you could put your questions in the chat at any time, we'll get to those at the end of the program.
All right, welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining both virtually and in person for the program. And I am with the Lake County Forest Preserves and the Dunn Museum. And we used to be the Lake County Discovery Museum over in Wakanda. So if you ever visited that site, same group, we just moved and changed our name a few years ago. So tonight we're going to be talking about true crimes in Lake County, and we are going to be focused on historic crimes. So those that took place at least over 50 years ago. And that way they're not connected to anyone necessarily today. But we also are going to be telling these stories chronologically. And how this program started to be put together is we received a lot of inquiries about the Rondout Train Robbery. So we are going to cover that as part of this. And as we started to investigate that, we started to come across other true crimes in Lake County's history and decided to put this program together. So we used the Dunn Museum's archives and also online newspaper records to start to put these stories together. So our first crime tonight is a little bit more detailed, so I will advise you of that. But it is one of the earliest crimes that we have recorded in Lake County history. So this first story of crime is the murder of Ruth Bryden on December 22nd of 1863. And Mrs. Bryden was a widow and owned a farm in Ela Township. Her farm had been rented to a man named William Bell, who had left a wife and daughter in Massachusetts and come to this area. He resided on the farm, and over time, hostility developed between Mr. Bell and Mrs. Bryden over land issues and the fact that Mr. Bell now wanted to marry Ruth's young daughter, which Ruth did not want. So tensions furthered when Ruth put $110 in a dress pocket, and she went to visit her brother-in-law, and when she returned, the money was gone. Mr. Bell had been repairing some sheds near the house, so she went to let him know that the money was missing and to question him. He claimed to have no information and had not taken the money, and Mrs. Bryden kept her strong suspicions that he had actually done this, which continued to increase the breach between them. The morning of December 22nd of 1863, between 7 and 8 in the morning, a neighbor's daughter heard a murderous cry and informed her father that she thought she had heard Mrs. Bryden yell, "Help, help, murder, for God's sake, save me." The neighbor, Mr. Morley, thought it was just some boys nearby who were making noise and continued about his work. And after some more thought and to satisfy his daughter, he decided to check in on Mrs. Bryden. Upon reaching the house, he found the door locked and no one answering his call. He went into the cow yard and he found there her body. It looked as though she had been milking when she met her untimely death, and her body was laying on the right side with a razor in her hand. Her face and head bore marks of having received blows from a flat object. Suspicions immediately went to Mr. Bell because of the previous hostility, and he insisted he was chopping wood and was not in the area at the time of the crime. However, there were tracks about the body that were traced to where Bell was chopping wood, and that, along with their past quarrels was enough for strong suspicion. Bell was immediately arrested and taken to Wakanda for examination, and he was found guilty after a 10-hour deliberation and was sentenced to hanging on June 13th of 1865. This actually became the first execution in Lake County history. He maintained his innocence, though, and claimed that he had not committed this crime. And some claimed there was a missing set of footprints leading up to the body. There should have been 3: Mrs. Bryden's, Mr. Bell's, or the murderers, and Mr. Morley's, who had found her. But there were only 2. And others thought he had nothing to gain from this, since he would not receive any of the land and would lose the farm. Rumors afterwards said that it was her brother-in-law or maybe her husband, who was actually not deceased, but maybe had just divorced her. All kinds of rumors spread. And another rumor that it was actually Mr. Morley, the neighbor, who had come upon her body, as he could then purchase her land. So we still don't know to this day if they accused and sentenced the right person. But here on the screen, you can see we have a map of Ela Township. And on this map, we have the land of Mrs. Bryden highlighted there for you, so you can see where it would be compared to today. All right, so we're going to jump ahead a little bit for our next crime. Oh, right back here. So if I can, Ela Township. So here's Lake Zurich. If those on virtual can see my cursor too. Can you guys see it? Yeah, there we go. And there's her land right there highlighted. So this is a plat map of Lake County. And we have a few in the Dunn Museum's collection, but you can actually go on the Lake County government website and look at many more of these. And you can actually pin different locations and look at them over time if you're curious. So you could even do that with your own property. So our next one is jumping just a little bit ahead into the 1900s. And this has to do with the Volo vigilantes. So to be ridden on a rail was a common form of mob punishment in colonial America. But curiously, it turned up in the village of Volo in 1913. And for those of you not familiar with this term, riding the rail or being run out of town on a rail was a humiliating punishment in which the victim was made to straddle a wooden fence rail held on the shoulders of individuals and then paraded around town and taken to the town limits and dumped. On the evening of July 15th of 1913, 15 women and 1 man of Volo attacked Mrs. Minnie Schultz Richardson and made her ride the rail for allegedly having relationship with her brother-in-law, William Dunnell. Minnie had married John Richardson in 1904, and Richardson's sister Rose had married William Dunnell. Rumors spread that Minnie and William were having an affair, and the townswomen met about the rumors and decided to take action against this perceived immorality. One of the captains of the group, Emma Statfield, went to the Richardsons' home and to pay a call, while the other women hid around a corner. When Minnie came to the door, the women grabbed her and dragged her to the rest. They started tearing her dress and placed her on a 12-foot fence rail. They then carried her a quarter mile to a dried pond and then tossed her into the mud. They threatened her and told her to leave town for 24 hours or else they would apply a coat of tar on top of it. When Minnie had not left town, the women actually showed up at her house with said tar but were unable to get inside. Minnie managed to escape with the help of her husband, who, quote, bundled his wife into a rig and drove 18 miles to Waukegan, where he obtained $1,500 by mortgaging his store. He then mortgaged his home as well and reportedly fled for England, where he was originally from. So at this point in the story, this had become not just local news, but national news, and was even picked up by the New York Times. Each of the women involved in this incident were brought to trial. They were found guilty of rioting and fined $100 apiece. Despite this, Emma claimed to the New York Times that she would ride Mrs. Richardson on the rail again. And if you can't tell, Emma is standing 4 in from the right, If I can get my cursor there, she's right here. Very proudly standing for this photo with her actions and the rail, as well as some of the other women. So after the events unfolded, John and Minnie Richardson divorced. William and Rose Dunnell also divorced. And on November 1st of 1916, William Dunnell and Minnie Schultz Richardson married in St. Joseph, Michigan, seeming to confirm the rumors that had sparked the Volo women's fury 3 years before. They were married a second time on March 12th of 1920 in Chicago, and they were married for 38 years. So,
Why did you marry again?
they think they had a ceremony a second time. Yeah, how they got married again, probably had a ceremony a second time. There's 2 records of their marriage in both places. So here we actually have a photo of Minnie. And this is a photo of Volo and the main streets around the time that she was ridden on the rail in the early 1900s. So these are probably some of the streets she was paraded through. So John Richardson summed up the actions of the vigilantes by stating, quote, "It was an act of middle-age barbarism and hardly worthy of women of Illinois who had just obtained the right to vote." So some of our stories today did receive national news as well as local. This next one, our staff was quite surprised about because this is quite a unique story. We'll see what your thoughts are as well. But it is not as well known as some of the other crimes that I will tell today. And I'm not quite sure why. So this is the story, though, of the Dynamite Girl. And on January 17th of 1918, so jumping just a little ahead of our Volo vigilantes, the Dynamite Girl, as the newspapers dubbed her, was arrested at Union Station in Chicago for transporting a suitcase filled with 36 sticks of dynamite and armed with a pistol. When arrested, she gave the name of Linda Jose, a character in an anarchist propaganda play. She refused to cooperate with police and detectives Frank Folsom and Tim O'Brien. She claimed to be 16 years old and had come on a train from Cleveland, Ohio. According to police in Ohio, the dynamite was stolen from a construction site, and she was probably on her way to carry out a revenge attack, possibly in Milwaukee. When questioned why she was carrying the gun and if she knew how to use it, she replied, "If I couldn't shoot it, I wouldn't be carrying it." So, teenager there, huh? Newspapers were up in arms trying to discover the truth of who the girl was, if she had connections, and what her motives were. After being arrested, she was brought to the Lake County Jail in Waukegan, and 2 weeks later, while still in Waukegan, she admitted to being Gabriella Antolini, or Ella, and was the daughter of Sante and Maria Antolini. This family had immigrated to the U.S. in 1907 from Italy, and her parents worked as contract laborers first in Louisiana and then in New Britain, Connecticut, where they did factory work. She was charged with being an anarchist sympathizer of the Industrial Workers of the World, or the IWW, which promoted worker solidarity and overthrowing the employing class. She was acquainted with anarchist Luigi Galliani, and from 1914 to 1932, Galliani's followers in the U.S. carried out a series of bombings and assassination attempts. While awaiting her trial, Ella planned her escape from the Waukegan jail. She planned to hide a milk bottle, which she intended to then attach to the end of a broomstick. She would then use this to knock out the sheriff when he entered her cell. She would grab his keys and then escape. But before she could act, her cellmate informed the sheriff of her plans. So she maybe shouldn't have told the cellmate first. Also during this time, her brother, Louis, visited her and brought with him letters that were written in Italian. Police believed him to be part of this anarchist plot and arrested him to figure out his connection and to see if he had more details he could share about his sister. He was eventually released after several hours of questioning, though. 5 months later, on June 1st of 1918, the Dynamite Girl was released from the Lake County Jail when a $15,000 bond was made by wealthy Italian immigrant Vincenzo D'Angelo of Chicago. He presented Ella as his daughter. And this $15,000 bond today would be over $250,000. It's quite a bond. A few weeks later, though, after this occurred, D'Angelo was actually murdered near his home in Chicago. Ella was quoted in the Chicago Tribune as stating, quote, "Oh, he wasn't killed on my account. It wasn't because he helped me, I am sure." In October of 1918, Ella pleaded guilty to unlawful transportation of explosives and was sentenced to the maximum imprisonment of 18 months and a $2,000 fine. Following her sentence, she was then sent to the Jefferson City Prison in Missouri, where she befriended Kate Richards, a socialist activist imprisoned for anti-war speech, and Emma Goldman, an anarchist known for her political activism. Together, the women were known as the Trinity, and they worked to improve prison conditions. After her release, she moved to Detroit and married. She later then divorced and moved to Florida in the 1950s, where she lived the rest of her life. And according to her son, his mother remained a devoted anarchist until her death in 1984. The chief investigator of the case, Hinton Claubaugh, said, quote, "She's the cleverest girl I have met in all my experience in investigation work. She is saturated in anarchy, seems to have been raised in its atmosphere." So, curious if anyone has heard of the Dynamite Girl before. Maybe we'll poll the virtual audience, but show of hands in here. Anybody heard of that story? No, and it's quite a tale. So this is a sketch of her from the paper. And then the postcard is from the Dunn Museum's collection, and it's of the jail and courthouse in Waukegan from around this time period. So this is where she would have been jailed and put through. So yeah, quite a story from this area. I'm surprised it hasn't been made into a movie or something yet. So we'll see.
Is that building still there?
Yeah, that's the, jail and courthouse in Waukegan. So this is the, yeah, still standing. All right, so our next few crimes do have to do with prohibition, which you can imagine led to quite a lot of crimes in this area and around the country. So prohibition in the United States started in 1920. And this law then increased the amount of illegal activities, such as the production, transportation, and sales of alcohol, as well as violent crimes associated with this. In Lake County, one prohibition-related crime began with the murder of William Peterson. He was a farmer and the only law enforcement officer for Winthrop Harbor. And you can see him here in the photograph on his motorcycle. So on Friday, January 13th of 1922, William Peterson observed a vehicle speeding along the state line near an auto repair garage. During Prohibition, bootleggers traveled from Wisconsin along Sheridan Road through Lake County. And in addition to the vehicle going over the speed limit, Officer Peterson may have suspected the occupants of this blue touring car of being whiskey runners. So you can see how being between two major cities with Milwaukee and Chicago, we would have a lot of traveling alcohol coming between the two, or even out to Lake County, which was quite a resort area at that time. So Peterson decided to chase after this speeding vehicle on his motorcycle for 5 miles, heading south on Sheridan Road. And as he closed in on the vehicle, he yelled for the driver to stop. But just then a man leaned out the back window and shot Peterson twice. The car then drove away and onlookers ran to assist Peterson. Deputy Sheriff Wilson of Kenosha and his wife were actually driving to Waukegan when they happened upon the scene. Peterson was placed in Wilson's car and driven to Victory Memorial Hospital in Waukegan, now Vista East, where physicians said he had actually passed before being placed in the deputy's car. A man who had observed the chase, named George Pavlik, went to Chicago to review mugshots while authorities launched a massive manhunt. On February 4th, it was announced that 3 were arrested for Peterson's murder at Collar's Tavern in Chicago. The shooter was Ignatz Potts, who was a woodworker and native of Hungary. Potts claimed that he was drunk on moonshine and barely remembered the incident. Quote, "I turned around and shot him. That's all I know. I was dazed for 3 days after that." Potts was found guilty and sentenced to death, and that was scheduled for June 16th of 1922. Gallows were brought to Waukegan from Chicago for this event, and even invitations were actually sent out to witness this by the sheriff's department. So this is actually in the Dunn Museum's collection, is on the side of your screen there. You can see one of these invitations. Before the execution occurred, though, Governor Len Small ended up pardoning Potts and releasing him. Governor Small had his own troubles. He had been indicted for embezzling $600,000 from the state. And on June 24th of 1922, he was acquitted of all charges, and later 8 jurors received state jobs. So later that same year, Governor Small was indicted again for having sold an estimated 500 pardons. He never went to jail, but was finally voted out of office. So Illinois politics maybe don't always change. But after his release, Potts left Illinois for Los Angeles, where he became an iron worker. So now our next crime is, as I mentioned, part of the reason why we started to investigate for this particular program. And this is quite a story. So we're going to piece together some of it here today. But in 1924, the largest train robbery in U.S. history took place in Rondout, Illinois. And a group of men were able to steal $3 million from a mail train, which, accounting for inflation today, would be over $44 million. With that inflation, it possibly makes this the largest train robbery in world history, not just United States history, with the other one being in the 1970s. So the Rondout Train Robbery became infamous not only because of this large amount stolen, but also because of events and not so smart of choices that happened after this initial crime. So the Newton boys were a group of brothers originally from Texas. They were bank robbers and quite successful at this, and decided to switch to robbing trains after being approached for their services and skill. Robbing trains could potentially be more profitable, but it was also more of a gamble, as the information about the train, its route, what it was carrying, and the security on the train were all privileged information known only to a few people that worked for the train company. So just like today, trains carried a variety of goods from place to place, and all of the valuables, whether it was cash, bonds, or jewelry, were kept in similar unmarked sacks as the regular mail. So only the train workers knew which each sack held. So if you attempted to rob a train, you might go away with just the regular mail, right? So the Newton boys found these few other men who had enlisted them to work with on carrying out the robbery, and they formed a plan. And on June 12th of 1924, Willis Newton and Brent Glasscock disguised themselves as train workers and hid aboard train number 57 of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul line before it left Union Station in Chicago at 9 p.m. This train was headed for Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then further stops further west. And it was also bound for Federal Reserve Bank, so it was carrying a lot of cash, bonds, and jewelry. As the train traveled north and approached the station at Rondout, the 2 men took command of the train and forced the engineer and brakeman to make an unscheduled stop at Buckley Road, where the rest of the gang was waiting in stolen Cadillacs. The group used gas masks and formaldehyde bombs to force the crew out of the 3rd car, number 2105, and had the train crew help load 63 specific mail sacks into the stolen cars. The robbery lasted maybe 15 minutes, and the robbers then sped off into the night with their stolen loot. So here we have some depictions of this event, and these are actually watercolor sketches that were done by an artist named Andy Austin. And she was a staff artist for WLS TV. And these were done for a February 1977 segment of a week-long TV news series on infamous Chicago area crimes. The Dunn Museum actually has 5 of these watercolors for depicting Rondout, and we have 4 that depict another crime we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So she had a 44-year career as a freelance courtroom sketch artist for ABC News Bureau and its Chicago affiliate, WLS TV. She drew proceedings for mobster Joey the Clown, ex-governors George Ryan and Rob Blagojevich, and serial killer John Wayne Gacy, as well as many more. So these she did specifically for that TV news segment. But you can see in the one, she's depicting them carrying those specific mail sacks into the stolen cars. And I don't know why, but every time I look at this one right here, it always looks like he's carrying like a box of heart-shaped candy. Is that just me? I don't know. But this one over here, they are depicting that unscheduled stop at Buckley Road. So though the crime did take place starting in Rondout, by the time the train stopped, it was at Buckley Road. So we'll see a couple more of those too. So once this occurred, police and newspapers were all over the case immediately. So here we can see train car number 2105 with damage from the robbers. And if you can't tell, you can see this handy arrow that points out that broken window here from those formaldehyde bombs being thrown. This we didn't add. This is in the newspaper. So they put the arrow in for the audiences then. We also have police lined up for action to scour the countryside on motorcycles over in the top. And Sheriff Hoffman giving instructions, and then a gentleman holding a mail pouch recovered from the woods. So, which was near the scene of this robbery. My favorite, though, headline from the newspapers is this one: 6 arrested, 1 is dying, woman talks. So throughout these newspaper events, there's quite a bit from this time period. So if you're curious and checking it out, newspapers.com does have a lot of these. And you can read articles as they kind of progress through learning more about the robbers and the crime and the trials that are occurring. But one part that's funny too is we'll come to in just a minute from those. So the robbers were able to get away, but one error led to their eventual capture of the entire group within a relatively short period of time. During the holdup, one of the members of the gang, Brent Glasscock, mistook another robber, Willis Newton, as a bank worker for the train, and he actually shot him 5 times during the robbery. At the end of the robbery, the group finally realized who had actually been shot after they took a head count and carried Willis to one of the cars and placed him on some of those stolen mail sacks. The trail of blood, though, he left behind, and the train workers' telling of the events led police to know somebody had been severely injured. And so they started to learn after some inquiries of a doctor who was treating someone with similar injuries in Chicago. And they were given an address in the city. And Willis Newton did actually survive these injuries. So at first, the men found in the apartment, which included some of the Newton brothers, as well as James Murray, a politician and alleged bootlegger, and others, gave fake names. And so in the newspapers, you see them with these fake names being identified. One of the brothers told them that his name was John Wayne. So for a lot of the newspaper recollections, it says John Wayne captured an apartment in Chicago. So that's quite interesting to see. Now, eventually, the truth came out through questioning, and they revealed their real identities. And the Newton brothers also chose to rat out the rest of those involved, possibly due to anger at Willis being shot by Glasscock. So their confessions led to the arrest of Herbert S. Holliday, who was arrested while on a drive with his niece and mother in Little Rock, Arkansas. He surrendered $21,000 in bonds and about $6,000 in unset diamonds. Brent Glasscock, who was arrested while leaving a sanitarium where he was being treated for chronic stomach trouble. He had $30,000 in cash on him and $50,000 worth of uncut diamonds when he was arrested. And here in the photos, you can see the Newton brothers around their injured brother, Willis, as well as Willis being carried out on a stretcher by police from that apartment in Chicago. Now, the plan had been in part to scatter, and they could not go as far as they were hoping to since one of them was injured, which led them to being in this apartment in Chicago. But some were able to scatter to other parts of the country, as you could see with those two arrests I mentioned, but also with one of the last of the Newton brothers to be caught, which is Jesse Newton, seen here. He had escaped to Mexico after the robbery and had suddenly become a lavish spender. He liked to boast of his horsemanship skill as well. And so federal agents were able to trick him into coming back into the United States so they could arrest him, because at that time he couldn't be arrested in Mexico. He had to be on US soil. They advertised a fake rodeo at Del Rio, Texas, and a horse that nobody could ride because it was too wild. Jesse bought new chaps and a sombrero for the rodeo and signed up. And as soon as he crossed the border, he was arrested. Because he was only paid $4,000 for the robbery, and because he fell so easily into this trap set for him, he was nicknamed the Goof. And throughout the trial, he also was photographed in his rodeo outfit seen here. So quite an interesting character. In a surprising twist, the last arrest revealed a shocking accomplice even to police. It was one of their very own. William Fahey was a U.S. postal inspector who helped to solve train robberies, and he was actually assigned to solve the Rondout case. Police had him secretly trailed under suspicion after he showed up to the robbery site early before being actually assigned to the case, and after he was found spending the equivalent of a month's salary at the time in one night, which was about $300. After the Newtons claimed his involvement, police had him connected to about $14,000 of the missing loot that could be traced directly to him. Police also discovered that Fahey not only had received full information on the registered mail to be dispatched on the number 57 train, but that he had even inspected the registry car number 2105 before the robbery and questioned the security levels on the train. His involvement was the key to this precise and quick execution of this robbery, though. And the last piece of evidence to secure his involvement was a tapped phone call he made to Murray, the politician, warning Murray about being a suspect. So all of the men were tried and convicted, but the prison terms are interesting to note. They were also convicted and sentenced within about 7 months of the crime. So quite a short period of time. Jesse Newton, the Goof here, received a year and a day. Willis Newton, Joseph Newton, and Brent Glasscock received 12 years each. William Fahey, James Murray, and Herbert S. Holliday, who refused to testify, were given 25 years each. And in a final piece of irony, the convicted men were sent to prison in private railroad cars. So Glasscock, Holliday, and the Newtons were sent to Leavenworth Prison in Kansas, and Fahey and Murray were sent to Atlanta. So there's one final piece to this story, though, that makes this robbery even more infamous. So part of the $3 million that they stole, you could see they spent, and maybe not in a secretive way either, which is partly why they were caught somewhat quickly. Another roughly 1.5 million was actually recovered. It was buried or hidden in barns around Lake County, Illinois, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Kansas City at the very least. So they tried to scatter it and bury it around. But one mail sack was not accounted for during the course of the trial and was thought to have carried $1,125,000 in banknotes. So to this day, it has not been recovered. and perhaps we will never know what happened to it. So the Newton brothers were questioned at different points, didn't remember, where it could have been. And there have been search parties that have gone out to try to find this or trace different steps. And so far, nobody has come across what happened to that missing money. So your guess is as good as ours. But if you would like to learn more about this story too, there are books that have been written about the Newton brothers. There's also a classic 1990s movie that your library might even have a copy of, starring Matthew McConaughey, Skeet Ulrich, Juliana Margulies, and it's called The Newton Boys. So in the end of the movie, they actually do interview the real brothers too. They're shown on camera. And if you want to even check it out from home later, a couple ways you can do that is on YouTube, search for The Johnny Carson Show and The Newton Boys. And Joe Newton actually made an appearance on The Johnny Carson Show, Tonight Show, in, I believe, like the 1970s, but he was in his maybe late 70s, early 80s, and had just been arrested again for trying to rob a bank. So maybe he didn't learn his lesson. But he does talk to Carson about the train robbery a little bit too. And in different instances, the brothers claimed it was still the best robbery ever executed. So it could have been maybe with some other circumstances. But one thing the Newton boys always prided themselves on too, is they said no matter how much they stole, no one ever was killed in any of their robberies. So that is true, but the other thing you can check out related to us is there are some related videos with the Dunn Museum's collection, as well as you might see a familiar face looking for an episode of Backstory with Larry Potash, where he also delves into this story even further. So, and came to visit the Dunn Museum. If you want to check out this historical marker too, it is just down the road from Lamb's Farm. So it's on 176 in a kind of an industrial park, but you can park and get out and look at this historical marker if you're interested too. So lots of ways to continue to interact with this story and learn even more later on. So we're going to continue on Prohibition, but we're going to jump a little bit here and talk about this large building for a minute. So the Mineola Hotel was located in Fox Lake and had connections to infamous Chicago mobs and many illegal Prohibition era activities. The hotel was built in 1884 by members of the Chicago Board of Trade. And it's believed the hotel's veranda was actually designed by Alphonse Howe and Charles Caskey. And they are the architects of the famed Grand Hotel on Michigan's Mackinac Island. So if anybody's ever been there, it does look a lot like the Grand Hotel here with the design. This hotel was built as a private clubhouse for Chicago's elite, but by 1891, it had been sold to Edson C. Howard, who remodeled it into a public hotel. This hotel consisted of 100 rooms, hot and cold running water, a beautiful natural setting, and recreational activities such as boating, fishing, and hunting. It only costs $2 a day for room and board, and the building is 225 feet long and 4 stories high. It was considered to be the largest wooden structure in Illinois, and previously that title went to the Zion Hotel until it was torn down in 1979. And unfortunately for this building, it is coming down at some point here, if you've seen in the news. There have been a lot of efforts to try to preserve it, a lot of efforts to put it on different endangered structures lists, but a development company purchased it and is going to make a new hotel. So we'll see what they do with that. I do believe, though, it is still currently standing if you wanted to drive or walk past it. So this building, though, has to do with our stories here too, because by the 1910s, Fox Lake was known for its drinking and gambling establishments. The Chicago Tribune reported it was, quote, worse than in the levee districts of the city. And Chicago had been working to clean up the city, which forced this activity to resettle elsewhere nearby. The newspapers actually dubbed the Mineola Hotel as, quote, the most vicious resort. So part of why that is has to do with these individuals. So if they look familiar to you, Bugs Moran reputedly controlled the booze and gambling rackets in places in Lake County, particularly Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, and Antioch, where he supposedly had a summer home. During Prohibition, the Mineola was also reportedly a hideaway for Al Capone and his gang, where they would drink and gamble throughout the entire night. Capone first made his appearance in Fox Lake in the 1920s, and he owned a summer home on Bluff Lake in Antioch, which may have heightened the tension between him and Moran. So, with these two gentlemen as well, the biggest connection to Chicago's mobs in Lake County is known as the Fox Lake Massacre. And the Fox Lake Massacre happened at 1:40 a.m. on June 1st of 1930. Members of Capone's gangs were gunned down by members of Bugsy Moran's at Manning's Resort on Pistachey Lake near Grand and Route 12. In this instance, 3 individuals were killed and 2 were injured. And it's speculated that the massacre actually occurred over Lake County beer wars, with a dispute over Chain of Lakes beer distribution between Capone's gang and Bugsy Moran's. Manning's Resort was owned by James Manning, who was a Fox Lake alderman and had recently switched from Bugs Moran's beer to the Drugan Lake supplied beer owned by Capone. So, with this tension, we do have some more watercolor paintings by Andy Austin depicting this event. So according to reports, George Drugan was visiting the Lakes region to see his beer deliveries were set for the opening of the summer resort season. He had been around the area with various known gangsters and had rented rooms at Manning's for a few of his associates. George was the brother of Terry Drugan, the head of the Drugan Lake gang. On the night of May 31st, 1930, Drugan and a few men and women had come into Manning's Resort at 9 p.m. According to the bartender, Louis Capella, everyone was in a good mood and all was merriment at the table. He was able to identify all of the men, but one particularly well-dressed man, who we still don't quite know who that was. Throughout the night, various parties arrived and the people were coming and going from their rooms at the resort. As it got later, the bartender began sweeping around the Drugan table to give them the hint that it was time to close. 5 minutes before the shooting started, Michael Quirk and 2 couples joined the party. The 2 couples went to their rooms and Quirk stayed behind to chat with the group. When the shooting started, Capella dove behind the bar to hide and was left uninjured. The shooting was fast, quick, and left massive chaos and destruction. The victims of the shooting were, from left to right, Michael Quirk, Sam Peller, and Joseph Birch. Immediately after the shooting, the bartender, Capella, saw injured people running from the scene trying to take cover. George Drugan, seen here, and Vivian Ponick McGinnis, also seen here, were the 2 that were injured the most. Capella tried to help McGinnis, but she screamed at him to go away. Vivian Ponick McGinnis was the wife of Chicago attorney Arthur McGinnis, and her mother actually ran a resort next to Manning's. Vivian was also the rumored girlfriend of George Drugan and had been drinking with the gangsters when the shooting occurred. Mrs. Manning, the wife of the owner, claimed to see 5 men running to a getaway car, which was parked on the side of the road with the engine still on. They were gone in seconds. Both George and Vivian were actually driven to Chicago, which at that time was a 2.5-hour drive. They were driven to the hospital for medical attention. And when they arrived at about 3:30 in the morning, Drugan had been hit in the right kidney and had lost a significant amount of blood. And many known gangsters actually lined up down the street from the hospital to be able to donate blood to these 2 individuals. Quite a scene. Chief Detective Stedge commented, quote, "Ordinarily, it would be bad medicine for them to invite a war with the Capone, O'Donnell, and Drugan Lake outfits. But the Moran and Aiello hoodlums have been up in Fox Lake long enough to start any kind of war." Many suspected that the Fox Lake Massacre was actually in retaliation for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14th of 1929, when 7 of Moran's gang members were killed on the north side of Chicago. Local authorities did not seem interested in solving the Manning's resort shootings, though, and within days, the attorney announced that he believed the killers were professionals from New York and were long gone. The 2 victims, George and Vivian, were actually later married in 1934, and they refused to talk about the incident publicly for the rest of their lives. Neither of them gave any information to the police on the cause of the shooting either. So here's some more watercolor images. So again, we have 4 for this event from Andy Austin. And here's an actual photograph of the scene of the crime. And if you can't tell, the policeman is helpfully pointing once again to where this occurred. So for this incident, though, this later became known as the Fox Lake Massacre, and it was the largest incident of prohibition-related crime in Lake County. So our last crime tonight, a little different note, moving from prohibition. And this one is actually about the attempted kidnapping of the granddaughter of a wealthy socialite and dairy farmer, Grace Durand, in 1932. Has anyone been to Crabtree Farm or heard of Crabtree Farm? This is Crabtree Farm right here. So Grace Durand, shown here, is actually the founder of Crabtree Farm in Lake Bluff, and she was one of the most forward-thinking dairy farmers of her day. She actually went to school for agriculture, which was unique for a woman in that time period too, and she was known for advocating for children's health, producing pure, high-quality milk, and for pampering her dairy cows. She enlisted the unusual method of playing opera music for them while she milked them. She claimed the music made the cows happy, and consequently their milk tasted better and was more nutritious. There is some science that does prove happy animals produce healthier, better products. So she might have been onto something there. I don't know if cows love opera music, but they do like music. With this, though, and her success in raising standards in dairying through hygienic methods, she became known as the Dairy Queen. So she and her husband, F. Scott Durand, had an adopted foster son named Jack. And Jack actually lived near Crabtree Farm, seen here, with his wife, Genevieve, and their children. Jack had a troubled past, though, which included serving time in jail for breaking and entering and theft. And while in jail, he became associated with various criminals, including Joseph Vertigo and Peter Cuniff, who became aware that he was from a wealthy family, and they plotted to kidnap him to get money. They threatened Jack by sending letters stating, quote, "I've been trying to see you for some time. Somehow you are dodging me. Now I'm giving you one more chance, and that's that." Jack chose to ignore these threats and not involve the police. And he also claimed to the crooks that his family would not likely ransom the demanded $50,000, which would be about $1 million today. Through sources of their own, police learned about the kidnapping plot and decided to hatch their own plan. They decided to allow the kidnapping to happen so they could catch the criminals in the act and arrest them on the spot. However, once the criminals realized that their threats were not going anywhere with Jack, they decided to switch their plan to instead kidnap his 2-year-old daughter, Patricia. The police were forced to drop their original plans to capture the criminals in action once a child was involved, and the police and Jack began to work together to try to figure out how to arrest these 2 men. Jack cooperated by turning over all of the threatening letters and sharing details from conversations he had had with the 2 men. The kidnappers did not realize the police were on to them and continued with their threats. One day, they actually showed up at Jack Durand's house and threatened his wife and demanded money from her. The crooks continued with their plans and officially set the date to kidnap Patricia. The police also heard about this scheduling kidnapping and went to guard Jack Durand's house, with the intent again to capture them, though, as soon as they arrived. Instead of showing up at Jack Duran's house, though, they actually showed up at Crabtree Farm. And Grace Durand lived there still and answered the door. They asked if Jack was home, and she thought fast. She told authorities later that she told them, I don't know yet why they didn't go to Jack's home, but she said, well, he isn't here right now. Won't you wait? And he'll be here in a few minutes. And while the two men waited on Duran's porch, she went inside and called the police at Jack's house. So as soon as that happened, the police came right over because it wasn't too far away. And the kidnappers were surrounded and surrendered on the spot. When confronted, the criminals claimed they had driven to Lake Bluff just to talk to Jack and just to ask him a favor for a former cellmate. They weren't there to kidnap anyone. But due to the quick wit and clever thinking of the Dairy Queen, Grace Durand, the kidnapping plot was foiled and her family was safe again. So here again, you can see Grace with her happy cows. And you can also see Crabtree Farm. And here we have from the newspaper at the time, a photo of Grace Durand during that period in 1932. We also have Jack's house here where they were going to carry out the kidnapping, and our two would-be kidnappers here. We have Joseph Vertigo in the hat here and Peter Cuniff in the glasses and hat there. So these are just a few stories of crimes in Lake County, but also just a few stories of the history of this area, right? There's lots more stories to tell. And has anyone been to the Dunn Museum in the audience? If you haven't, come check us out. We are in Libertyville. We are on Winchester Road, just between Butterfield and Route 45. And so you can come see us. It's in the general offices for the forest preserves. But again, we used to be in Lakewood Forest Preserve in Wakanda if you ever visited us there. You can come see all of our permanent galleries that tell the story of Lake County history. And right now, our special exhibition is called Dinosaurs, Fossils Exposed. So if you know anyone who likes fossils and dinosaurs, you can come check that out till mid-January. After that, we're going to have an exhibit more closely related to us about the forest preserves, and that will be followed by an exhibit about cicadas because they're coming. If you didn't know, there is a unique occurrence with those that's happening next year, and there will be different broods that are coming out together. So.
Than other years?
Yes, more next year. There are cicadas that come out in different cycles, 17 years and 13 years. And next year they both come out together. So in the summer. So it will be a little noisy next year as you hear them going around. So we'll have an exhibit that will explain that more. You can also check out our website for more programs. We have in-person programs, virtual programs. We also do guided history walks, they're called, where you get a history educator as well as an environmental educator, and we take you through preserves and you get to learn about both aspects. So we have one coming up on November 15th that's actually at Fort Sheridan, if you're interested. Beautiful this time of year out there. But lots more to check out there, and other ways to interact. We do have the YouTube channel that I mentioned before, so lots of different videos on there. You can watch our staff as we've learned to create virtual content in the last few years. And then you can also interact on our history blog. So this is written by our current historian, Diana Dretsky, and she has all kinds of different stories about Lake County history to share. She's been writing this blog for many years. So most likely, if you're interested in a topic, you can search and find something she's written about it. So, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take some of those too. And we'll see. Yeah.
So this is about the Dynamite Girl.
Sure.
Why was she brought to Lake County if she was arrested at Union Station?
Good question. At that time period, I think this was just one of the closest jails and might have had openings as well, or based on her crimes that she committed at that time. Waukegan was one of the bigger cities, and so she was brought there for, I'm not exactly sure, but most likely that's it. They had space, probably.
So I looked and it doesn't look like we have the boys available here in the library, but if you wanted to see if you can do it in the library loan, just request it here and she'll have it sent over here for you if that's something that you'd like to see.
Sure. Yeah. So it was just mentioned for the audience virtually that the Newton boys, they don't have here at this library, but you can do an interlibrary loan if you'd like to watch this classic 1990s movie and check that out. So Christian Slater is also in it. So it's a lot of people big in the 1990s that depict that. So did you see it? Yeah, it's an interesting movie. And yeah.
It's right here, you know, in Rondout. It's right off 176.
Yeah, and even for how big that event was at the time that it happened, you know, a lot of people are not as familiar with that story even today. And there's a lot more moving pieces that you get from some of those newspaper articles too, or reading some of the books that talk about more their bank robbing side of things for the Newton boys. Lots of interesting stories from them.
Did you hear anything about a member of the Dillinger gang? He was imprisoned in Waukegan, and apparently he was trusted or he had some connection with the judge or somebody, but he was allowed to walk around freely during his incarceration.
Yeah.
During the book I read, and he actually got married during one of these excursions.
Yeah, there's lots of stories of different events with the Dillinger gang was just mentioned with being one of them being jailed here and being able to walk freely. So I have not heard that, but I have heard some events with the Dillinger connections around this area, or even just stories about him too, sending a letter to Henry Ford, thanking him for making a nice, fast car. So the Henry Ford Museum actually has the copy of that letter. Yeah. For Dillinger, that's early 1900s too. Yeah. Yeah. 30. There we go. 34. So yeah, if you haven't heard of Dillinger, there's a lot of books about that too. Interesting stories and connections more with Chicago. But yeah, that's interesting to know a Lake County connection there.
How about Bugsy Siegel?
I've not heard Bugsy Siegel, which
I was working construction. I had a construction delivery to an old house
mhm.
right off Route 12, and I was talking to the homeowner, and she said that it was built by Bugsy Siegel as a place for his girlfriend.
That could be. So, you know, with some of these prohibition related crimes and why we had so many too, is at that time period, not just the Mineola is around, but there's a lot of other resorts. And we don't always think of that today, but Lake County was a vacation spot and a resort spot where people from the city of Chicago would take the train up to escape kind of the conditions, crowds, the dirty streets in Chicago, and come out for the nature. And there's even a postcard in our collection that says, Illinois has both the nightlife and the wildlife. And I would assume wildlife was more, you know, us at that time. Nightlife was more Chicago with the pictures there. So a lot of people would come out and buy summer homes, as you could see with Capone and Bugsy Moran. But there are many more that would have that too, or buy property around the area. For the lakes and, you know, escaping that city to try to maybe do some of their illegal activities as well, with transporting and selling alcohol. So, yeah. Other questions from this audience or the virtual audience? Yeah.
Jeffrey Barrett ever done anything about this in WTTW?
I don't know if they've done anything on WTTW about this, but Larry Potash did for his show Backstory with Larry Potash. He did investigate the Rondout Train Robbery further. And so if you you can go straight to his page and search for that. But one of the easiest ways is to go to the Dunn Museum's YouTube channel and look we have 2 related videos on there about Rondout. And one looks at the pieces by Andy Austin more closely, so you get to see those a little bit more close up. The other one looks at some other related pieces, like we have the depot sign from the station there. We have a couple other related pieces too from the train station itself at Rondout. And then one of them does link to the backstory that Larry Potash did related to this. And he, during that, came out to the museum and also interviewed other people that were related to this event, and even talked with some of our local train historians because they know a lot of history. So yeah, so that's an interesting one. I know that story exists, but I don't know if WTDW has done anything on that or any of the related events. There was that series in the 1970s for WLS TV. So that I don't know if you can access, like searching for. I haven't tried. So you could try Googling that later and see what might come up, though don't quote me on that. I don't know what will come up for you. So, but yeah.
Thank you so much. So,
Yeah,
you want to say thank you to the people that joined us from home?
sure.
Out of that portion, we got a couple more questions.
Yeah, well, thank you so much to the virtual audience and those in person for joining us. And if you have more questions, feel free to reach out, but also come visit us at the Dunn Museum or some of our other historic sites too. We have tours at the Adlai Stevenson House coming up. We also have tours at Fort Sheridan. So you can check out a lot of Lake County history by visiting the places where these events occurred too. So thank you very much. Thank you.